This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us now in studio is Maine State Treasurer Joe Perry. Welcome back.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
I think this is your third time. And the last time we met with you, you had just begun your position as Maine State Treasurer.
Yes, I didn't know much about what I was doing at the time.
What have you learned since then?
It's a fascinating job. I had been in the legislature for many, many years prior and worked with treasurers over the years and really did not fully understand what the treasurer's job was. A lot of the treasurer's job is not in the treasurer's office. It's out serving on boards of directors that have bonding authority throughout the state, FAME, Maine State Housing, Maine Municipal Bond Bank, Maine State Retirement, and many, many others. That's where most of my time is spent.
For instance, if you're on the Maine Housing Board, what is your responsibility on that board?
Well, it's the same as any other board member. I'm an ex officio. I'm there as part of my job. The rest of the board members are appointed by the governor. So as a constitutional officer who's elected by the legislature, I am the only legislative eyes and ears on these committees. And that's not a big deal generally, but we can have situations with divided government where there could be friction between the governor who appoints the rest of the board in the legislature. And it's important for the legislature to have their own eyes and ears on these boards. My term is somewhat undefined. Every 2 years, that could be it. So other folks know when their board terms are going to end.
Now, transportation. There is reportedly a $400 million shortfall between state and federal. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that situation?
Well, that was kind of interesting. It came out just after the legislative session ended. And that's an issue that's been percolating up for a very long time. If you remember Angus King's first term as governor, he passed a transportation package that included gas tax indexing. Gas tax is about the only tax, or excise taxes in general, that are not indexed to inflation. Sales tax stays at 5 or 5.5% where it is currently, but prices go up. That tax rate stays the same, but incomes go up year after year. So it grows with the economy. But gas tax is the same number of pennies regardless, year in and year out. We had indexing, so that was the one time where gas tax increased with inflation. It went up around a penny a year. When Paul LePage became governor, he and the legislature repealed that gas tax indexing. So for the last 16 years, we have not had that penny or so per year. On top of that, as you folks well know, electric cars and better gas mileage is really putting a squeeze on the transportation budget. Okay, so that's how we got here. That's the situation we're dealing with. The legislature has put on Band-Aids by doing some bonding, which is paid back through general fund revenue. So that's taking general fund revenue and augmenting the transportation budget. It became more acute a few years ago, and the legislature decided to dedicate 40% of the sales tax revenue that you folks collect, car sales, and dedicate it to the highway fund. I was chair of the taxation committee. It went through our taxation committee. I, to a great extent, helped make that happen. However, I'm not a believer in that policy. I honestly think the policy should be to keep the budget separate and deal with the funding through the transportation committee and through things like gas taxes and other ways they have to raise revenue. I don't think we should be mixing, but the problem was so dire, I did not see an alternative, and we got that done to help. Now, what I'll say moving forward will be a legislative and with a new governor, their solution, but we have tremendous bonding capacity. We're bonding far less than we have over past years. So if they wanted to, say, have a big bonding package, the state is well positioned to afford it.
Can you explain that in detail?
Yes, we have different types of bonding here in the state of Maine, but generally the bonds people think of are general obligation bonds backed by the full faith and credit of the state of Maine. That requires someone to propose legislation, maybe the governor, maybe a legislator, for a bonding idea. It goes to the appropriations committee. There might be billions of dollars of requests, and they whittle it down to what they think the state can afford. But then the hurdle becomes quite high because after it gets out of the appropriations committee, it has to get through the House and Senate with a 2/3 vote, which does not happen on a lot of things. So it's a very high standard. And then the governor signs it into law. But then there's another step. It has to go out to the voters, and it has to be approved by the voters. So when I was first elected to the legislature 30 years ago, roughly 7.5% of the general fund budget was money dedicated to paying general obligation bonds. And the legislature felt that that was too much spending on bonds. So we had a policy we would only authorize 90% of what was retired in any given years for bonding. What we paid off this year, say it was $100 million, we would only authorize $90 million of new bonds in that year because we wanted to get the threshold down to 5%. 5% of the state budget could go to paying principal and interest on bonds. And we did do that. We got to 5%. We stayed there for many years. But quite frankly, over the last 10 or 15 years, we have done less and less bonding. And I believe the current impact on the budget, it's less than 2%. It might be less than 1.5%. And just for a quick reference on that, we paid $80 million in principal this year, and we went out for $27 million in new bonds. So we knocked another $50 million off the state's debt this year.
Now, I know that the governor and the legislature decided to send out these $300 checks for people with certain incomes. And a lot of people criticized that and said maybe it should have gone to the roads or bridges. I think we're one of the worst in the country in infrastructure. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely an issue. I mean, we're a large rural state. We have roads everywhere, and it's expensive to build, expensive to maintain. In that transportation budget, it's the snow plowing in the winter, it's the ditching in the spring. The cost of salt is high. The cost of labor is high. It's hard to find folks. The cost of fuel is high. Not only is the cost of fuel high for the DOT trucks and plowing, it increases the cost of the asphalt and the projects are doing. So this is a problem that's been building for a very long time. As treasurer, that's one of our core functions, is protecting and investing the cash pool. The cash pool is all the money of the state pooled together, and then we invest it. We have about $3.5 billion on hand has been the average since I've been treasurer, and we keep that money invested every day. We only take out what's being spent daily as needed to cover checks. The rest is earning interest. We earned $150 million last year in interest, so that's money that can go to the public good without coming out of the public's pocket. We have $1.03 billion in the Budget Stabilization Fund. That was a political decision for the governor to propose it. It was a political decision for the legislature to include it in the budget. The budget was passed with a majority. It did not get 2/3. So there was not broad agreement in the legislature. People have mixed feelings. As treasurer, it's not my job to judge that. However, I see strong arguments on both sides. I see a strong argument for leaving that money invested. It's earning interest. And when times get tough, $1 billion won't go all that far. Our state budget is something like $12 or $13 billion. We had a $1.2 billion budget deficit when John Baldacci was governor. The economy was down nationally. That flows down to the state. Our revenues were down. We had a $1.2 billion budget deficit with a $6 billion budget. And they were protracted. We had deficits for several years in a row. So with a budget twice the size, $1 billion isn't going to get us through much of a downturn. So I understand people having very different views on what we should have done.
Speaking of the budget, I know you've been in legislature for a while. How did we get from $6 billion to $12 billion in 7 years?
I can't tell you the annual budget, what it has been over time, but it was $6 billion back around 2010. I think it's taken like 16 years to get there, but you got to look at things. One, there's been a lot of inflation, right? During COVID, we went through a period of inflation. That affects the cost of government the same as it does with households. So you're going to see bigger increases during inflationary time. But secondly, an awful lot of that spending goes back to the taxpayer in other ways. For the first time ever, the legislature hit 55% school funding. We have expanded the homestead exemption, that's property tax relief. We have expanded direct property tax relief, particularly for seniors. We've created and expanded the retirement pension. That's a revenue reduction. These other things are actually expenses in the budget. We dedicated $100+ million a year from the general fund budget to the transportation budget. So the budget has grown. I would argue it's met a lot of unmet needs over the past 8 years, but also a lot of that money, had it not been spent, we've already got a terrible property tax situation because the home values have increased so much relative to other property. But I would say a lot of that spending, had it not been done, it would just show up on someone's property tax bill.
Because all the property taxes have gone up. I know Deer Isle in Hancock County, in Penobscot County, and we don't have the jail yet, the taxes have gone up considerably.
Yeah. It's interesting in a place like Deer Isle, coastal homes increase much faster than homes that are not on the water, and that does shift more burden onto the coastal homes. In a place like Bangor, where there's lots of commercial property, the commercial property is not increasing to the extent homes have increased. So if, say, 5 years ago, 50% of the city's budget property tax collection was collected from homes and 50% from businesses, as homes have increased so rapidly, faster than commercial property, it might be 60% of the total burden rests on homes now. So that's putting tremendous pressure on the homeowner, in addition to inflation, in addition to these other forces. And there's just not enough money at the state of Maine to ever make that up, to expand the homestead exemption enough, to expand programs to help keep property taxes down enough without some sort of constitutional change that allows us to tax home property different than every other property. And that would come with its share of detractors as well. Nothing's easy when you're talking about changing tax policy.
The other thing I noticed is a lot more nonprofits Bangor in the state of Maine. And some of them I know don't pay any property tax. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a real issue. You take a town like Orono that has the University of Maine. There's so much of the value in Orono is government, educational, tax exempt. Here in Bangor, churches, hospital. Now, the hospital's a great employer, but there's no real property tax collected from there. But churches, nonprofits, these are places that have fire hydrants in front of them and have first responders show up and help if there's an issue and the roads are plowed and such, but they are tax exempt. And you want to get into another thorny issue, let's start talking about taxing nonprofits. And there's been a discussion over the years, maybe tax nonprofits at the municipal rate, the part of the budget that provides all these services, and leave the school part out of it because these nonprofits don't have kids in school. Even something like that would go a long ways towards supporting the homeowner with lower property taxes, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, I'm sure it's a thorny issue, but there should be a way to approach it to make it a little more fair across the board, even if they paid $1,000 a year.
Yeah.
Anything would make it a little bit easier on the property owners in Maine.
Well, we're getting to a point where everything, I think, is always on the table. Every legislative year, everything gets looked at. But I believe the pressure on the property taxpayer, the homeowner, is getting so great that we're going to be looking into all sorts of options more seriously than have ever been considered before. And some nonprofits pay a pilot payment in lieu of taxes, and we can't force that. But some will pay voluntarily to help the costs of the communities that serve them and that they serve. And I think that is the right thing to do. And I think it may become law that some participation has to occur. And the homeowners may get to the point where they demand it. And then the legislature will listen.
So you stated we have just over $1 billion for the rainy day fund. And yet the administration decided not to move forward with forgiving taxes on tips or overtime. What are your thoughts on that? Could we not afford that within our budget?
Well, that's not great tax policy. I'll get into that. But one thing we would never do is fund an ongoing expense with one-time money. So when you see the affordability checks, and you saw this through COVID, it was, I think, a surprise to everyone just how much our revenue grew. We were taking in record revenues, but none of us believed that we had hit a new baseline that we could count on. We felt like the ongoing baseline of revenue was somewhere about halfway between where we had been in these new revenue numbers. And so all those one-time checks that went out during COVID was the difference between where we thought the new baseline was going to be and where the current revenue was. So that was one-time money used to help people through a difficult time with what we thought was a one-time spike in revenue. And I think the forecasting committee who predicts this stuff has really nailed it because we've been very close ongoing. So I would never, I don't believe anyone would ever consider funding something like that with one-time revenue. Now, if you look at the tax policy, it's not great tax policy. One, I can get into my feelings on that. And secondly, it's for a very limited period of time. So we tend to conform to federal tax changes as much as possible. The legislature does. I say we, I'm not in the legislature anymore. It was not my decision, but we did have a bill on the state level when I chaired the tax committee a few years to eliminate the income tax on overtime. At the time, I mean, they've had to accommodate, but at the time, the payroll companies were saying, we don't record it that way. We can't report it that way. The state doesn't accept information that way. It's ripe for fraud. And then what about the poor guy who has 3 jobs and none of it's overtime, or the business owner working 100 hours a week and none of it's overtime? And why on tips? In a restaurant, oftentimes the wait staff are the ones making the most income. And why are they getting the tax break that the busboy and the kitchen worker and the rest of them aren't getting? So those are the political arguments. And thankfully, I didn't have to be part of it. But what I know is it had a steep price tag that would have had to come from somewhere. And the only places you can turn would likely end up being a tax shift to someone else in a different way. Maybe we couldn't expand the homestead exemption. Maybe we didn't keep school funding at 55%. Maybe we couldn't have expanded the senior pension income as much. It would have come from somewhere for a targeted group of folks for a limited period of time. And I think the legislature just made the decision it was not a good idea to conform.
So what are your thoughts on the U.S. Senate race? We've had Graham Plattner on our program, and now obviously he's out.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. He ignited a movement like I've never seen in the state of Maine before, and I think he tapped into something people feel that for most people, life is a struggle, and inflation is hitting in a difficult way. Feeling it in the home, affordability is a real problem, and so he really ignited a lot of passion out there, like something that I don't think any of us have ever experienced. And I thought there were a lot of issues. Someone who served our country, who was in combat, anyone will come back with PTSD, and people tend to self-medicate, and there are issues I can't even imagine that not just Graham Plattner, but our military everywhere are dealing with, and I think most of them keeping them inside. And I'm glad that society has come to a point where I think it's a lot safer for people to reach out for help, and hopefully the resources are there for folks as needed. Unfortunately, it was a slow drip where people were willing to accept people change and people deserve second chances, and it seemed like there was a lot of information he was very forthcoming with. Unfortunately, it was a slow drip that came to a head with accusations that seemed credible, that went so far over the line it was not acceptable for him to be our candidate anymore. And hopefully the people who bought into the message will find a new candidate that they feel like can move forward with the priorities they have. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be messy. This is something that has to be pulled together in such a short period of time, involving thousands of people, complicated rules that need to be followed. Obviously, whatever happens, there'll likely be folks who aren't satisfied with it and aren't happy with it. And hopefully it does not cause a divide in the party. From my perspective, hopefully when we get through this, we can move on to an issues-oriented debate between the incumbent and whoever the challenger might be, and let the folks of Maine make a decision on who they think is best to represent them moving forward. If we get there, if there's time for people to absorb it all and make a good decision come November, well, that remains to be seen.
Are you concerned there's going to be a lot of write-ins for Graham Plattner? He had some very strong supporters. I still see signs around the state.
Oh, for sure. I had a knock on my door, which everyone hates, in this day and age here. Hear the phone ring or a knock on your door. And I went to it, and it was a lovely retired couple canvassing for Graham Plattner. And I struck up a little conversation with them. This was 2 months ago, maybe. They were from Seattle, Washington. They were a retired couple who, I don't know how they get to Maine, how long they plan to spend here, how much of their, I assume it was on their own dime that they felt so strongly about what he could bring to the Senate that they were able to come here, willing to come here. So I suspect there are folks, for whatever reason, maybe they don't find the most troubling accusations credible. I hope someone wouldn't look past that if they felt it was credible. I suspect there's a possibility of that, but he will not be a candidate on the ballot. The candidates had to go through a process to be considered. So I don't know what would happen. I don't know enough about the process, but I don't believe we could come out of it where the majority say, no, we want to stick with him. I don't believe there's any process that would allow for it. But you remember when Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton had a very spirited contest that was much closer than anyone had imagined. Bernie had really ignited this movement. And when it came to the Democratic convention that summer, there was a real rift that I don't believe ever was settled before Election Day. And it wasn't good for the party.
Is there a divide between the Democratic Party and the Socialist Party inside the group?
Well, I think we see that now on both sides. On the Republican, you have the MAGA end, and then you have the more moderate end. On the Democratic side, you have more moderate, maybe establishment, you might call them. And then you have folks who have labeled themselves, say, Democratic Socialists. And I just think it's a big tent. I think on both sides it's a big tent, and you have the full spectrum of what people believe. And I think people love to use the socialist label because that sounds kind of scary or kind of anti-capitalist or what have you. But I think that it's pretty healthy that we have socialized education and trash pickup and taking care of our roads and Social Security and Medicare. So I don't think it's a scary thing, but I think that that is a wedge that's convenient to make it seem more extreme than it is, in my judgment. But it's always helpful to label someone something, and a lot of people labeling themselves Democratic Socialist. I see that that's a perfect wedge issue for anyone to use if they want to stir up discontent in any party.
Well, you're right, because there are some Republicans that have been critical of Bobby Charles, and they feel that if their candidate didn't win, that they may not be supporting him because there was a little bit of a tiff on social media. And so there can be a division under each tent.
Yeah, that's
politics.
As long as I can remember, that's politics, right?
Exactly.
So the other question I had for you is the budget is around $13 billion or so, roughly, and it's grown quite a bit over the last 7 or 8 years. Do you predict that the budget will be around 21 or 22 billion 8 years from today?
It could be. We'll have to wait and see. Now, remember, that's a 2-year budget. So when you hear an 8% increase, people assume that's year over year, but that would be over 2 years. Actually be over 4 years, 8% increase in a 2-year budget over a previous 2-year budget.
But you also have a supplemental budget that comes in between, and this year was what, 500 million?
500, that sounds about right. It's surprising. I've been treasurer for not even a year and a half, how disconnected I have come from the nuts and bolts of the legislature. They're in the next building over. They're dealing with these political issues. They're crafting budgets, and I'm at board meetings and doing treasurer stuff. But what I would say about that is the tax code that has allowed for a $12 or $13 billion budget and surpluses is roughly the same tax code that allowed for a $6 billion budget and billion-dollar deficits. So really, it's more of a function of the performance of our economy that has collected this revenue. In that supplemental, there were some new taxes, but if you go back over the past 30 years, we have cut taxes significantly. We reduced the sales tax from 6 to 5%. It's gone back up, but we created the homestead exemption. We fixed and expanded direct property tax relief with the property tax fairness credit. We have created a huge pension income deduction. We have refundable earned income tax credits. We have refundable child tax credits. We repealed the personal property tax on business equipment and tons of targeted increases. And for most of the last 30 years, the only taxes that had been increased under the Democrats were
millionaire tax.
Let's get to that next, but tobacco taxes. I'm not blaming Paul LePage or the Republicans when the sales tax went up from 5 to 5.5%, the meals tax, the room tax, the auto tax. It was really very, very difficult economic times. And the state is really limited on how much we can influence our economy for the good or the bad. We follow the national economy. We follow the worldwide economy. And when LePage was governor, the Great Recession had been occurring, right? So those things were necessary to meet the basic obligations of the state, that revenue was raised. But over the last 30 years, we've actually reduced a lot of revenue. But with that said, the tax code is largely the same, and it's more of a statement of the strength of the economy that has collected this much revenue, and a lot of it was spent in trying to help people in other ways live better lives and hopefully reduce other taxes, property taxes and such. So those are all political decisions. And there might be a new governor who thinks cutting $1 billion out of the budget is the right way to go. And maybe they could get that done depending on the makeup of the legislature. But if it shows up in someone's property tax bill or some other expense, their health care bill, they might, in the end, not be so happy with it.
So again, we're at roughly over $1 billion in the rainy day fund. And yet we have a new millionaire's tax, which people are concerned that there wasn't a carve out for the S Corps, because people with S Corps may or may not actually have $1 million. It's just the way they process their tax return, but they don't have the money. So that's one concern we've brought up to every candidate. So if we're continuing to add taxes, why is that when we have over $1 billion in the rainy day fund?
Once again, we're back to the rainy day fund serving a specific purpose of helping us through difficult times when the economy takes a downturn. It's been about 20 years since we've had a downturn, so we know it's coming at some point. And that will be a Band-Aid. That will not get us through any protracted downturn. And history would say something like that's likely coming in the future sometime. And we want to be ready for it.
So tell us how the Treasury's office is involved with the oversight of the Maine paid family leave plan.
So we're not involved in any way with the administration of the plan other than we handle the money. The money that has been collected to support this is part of the cash pool. We keep it invested daily. We've grown a lot of interest for the program, and we'll make sure the money's well taken care of. That's the extent of the Treasurer's office. And the paid family medical leave, that is, I think, 0.5% from the employee and 0.5% from the employer?
Yes.
As of now. and things can change, right? So I was in the legislature when that occurred. It did not go through my committee. I was not intimately familiar with it as I would a tax policy, but there's a credible argument to be made that this is something families need, people need, that every other country has it, and there's a credible argument to be made that's one more brick on the load for businesses, and it's only 0.5% for the employee, but that's something coming out of their check. And maybe an employee who never uses it. We don't know. None of us know the future. And I questioned as a legislator, can 1% really cover the needs? But as treasurer, we oversee the fund. We've been collecting for over a year, building this fund to support the payments that started in, I think, in May of this year. People could start using paid family medical leave. And I'm interested to go back and look at what the drawdown has been so far. But over the course of that year and a half, I believe we built up something like $250 million in reserves to fund this. So now I guess we'll find out in the coming months or years if 0.5% from each is going to fund it. And then any employer or employee, I'm sure a lot of employers, as a small employer myself for the past 30 years until I became treasurer, there wasn't a lot of extras I could offer to an employee. And the Merit Retirement Savings Plan, something the state has done, the paid family medical leave, that would at least be something that my employees could get that I couldn't offer on my own. A big employer like you with skilled technical people that if they're out was a real challenge, it may be different from your perspective. Those are all answers we will learn in the coming years.
I have a business and I'm the only employee and I still have to pay in and
really?
I'm never going to use it.
Interesting.
So a big part of your job is related to unclaimed property. Tell us about that.
I love unclaimed property. So it's a staff of around 5 people, one dedicated to searching out, seeking out, and collecting property that may belong to someone in Maine who has lost track of it. And companies are required to go through their records. And if they have property, it could be stocks, bonds, it could be a savings account, it could be an uncashed check, whatever it may be that someone's lost track of, they're required to file with the state of Maine that we've had this property for 3 years and no one's claimed it or they've lost touch with it. And then they turn it over to us. And then there's a staff of 4 or 5 people who try to get it back to the rightful owner. And we get 72% of everything that's collected in any given year returned to people. And people just go to maineunclaimedproperty.gov and put your name in, and you may be surprised that there's something you forgot about that we have, and we'll get it back to you. But one of the services we have, we call it data match, where we have third-party vendors who can match their knowledge of who people are and where they live to our records of what we have for people. And if we are confident we have a 100% match, that we will just send a check to someone, and so they won't know it's coming. We just sent 35,000 checks totaling $10,500,000 to folks who had no idea that they were owed this money and it was coming. And so then people worry, well, why am I getting this check from the state? Is this a fraudulent situation? Is this a real state check? And because they weren't expecting it. So if anyone who's listening got a check from us recently, that was likely a check that we collected for you that's due to you. And the good news is if your claim is over $5,000, we won't send a check that large, but you may have received a letter from the state of Maine saying we have $5,000 or more of your money and please claim it. That's also real. Please call us. We want to get the money back to you. But I do worry that there's constant attempts to defraud us, the state, to get into the state's checkbook, to get into the state's money, or to trick people into thinking someone who is not the state is and trying to fraud you somehow. With the state of Maine, the Treasurer's Office will never ask you for your banking information so that we can access it or what have you. We will never ask you to pay anything up front or pay anything at all ever to collect your unclaimed property. And in the state of Maine, there's only one licensed finder. There is one agency that will go out and find someone and let them know they have unclaimed property, and there is a commission paid to them. But they take on the bigger and the more difficult ones. The average person can just check our website, and if you have money, claim it online. We'll get it right out to you.
And what's the website again?
maineunclaimedproperty.gov. Make sure you go to .gov, maineunclaimedproperty.gov. Pops right up. You search your name, search your family, your friends. You'll be a hero if you find unclaimed property from someone you know. And if you claim it online, it's very quick and easy.
So the criteria is it needs to be 3 years old?
After 3 years of no activity, it's considered abandoned. And the reports come in November. So I had no unclaimed property last summer. Turns out in November or December, I did. I check it frequently, and I had roughly $40. It was from Capital One. I believe I had a zero balance on a credit card. I had a credit of some sort. Maybe something got returned. So now I had a negative balance of $40. I never used it. And after 3 years, they sent it to the state of Maine. The state of Maine got it back to me. Some of these claims are large. People would be surprised. They may not thought they had a large claim somewhere somehow, but they might.
So I guess we need to check, David.
I guess so.
A lot of businesses, there's so many transactions, things can get mixed up, and a lot of businesses have unclaimed property.
And also remember, if you had a different last name, right, you need to check.
Absolutely. That's right. A lot of people whose name may have changed don't think to check their previous name, and that's important. We had a telethon. We do this once a year where people can call. It's a TV station in Portland carries it, and we have the whole office there taking calls. And one woman called in and had 7 different names that needed to be checked. So,
wow.
Yeah, we checked them all for her.
Hopefully she got something.
Let's hope.
As we wrap up, if by chance the legislature, either the House or the Senate, changes to Republican,
Yep.
and you may not be their choice for treasurer.
That's right. Could be.
What's in your future?
It's a good question, because when I was elected treasurer a year ago, December, I made the decision that I would sell my business. I'd run for over 30 years. I had to focus 100% on being treasurer, knowing it's a 2-year gig and I can't retire in 2 years. And treasurer is elected by the House and Senate combined. Whichever party has the majority selects their choice, their nominee. And if the Democrats lose control of the House and Senate, there's a strong likelihood I will not be reelected as treasurer. And now I don't own a business, but I have to keep working to support my family. That is a great question. It's one I think about often. And I'm not sure if I remain treasurer for the full 8 years that are afforded any person under term limits. I still don't think I'll be ready to retire. So I better have a backup plan of some sort.
Well, David may be hiring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind selling Mercedes.
There you go.
I've been a car salesman before.
Exactly. You would do a great job, I'm sure.
Maine State Treasurer Joe Perry, thank you so much for joining us.
I love getting together with you guys.
Yes, thank you for your time. It was fun. You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.